This is the next lesson in Paper 3 Germany. Now this is the last lesson of Unit 1, and this is continuing what we've been looking at over the last few lessons, looking at the period 24 to 29, and today we're going to look at how the culture of Germany changed during this period. So we've looked at the political side with Stresemann, we looked at the standard of living and women's lives in the last lesson, and now we're going to look at the broader picture. So what you need to be able to do today is, number one, describe the key elements of Weimar culture. Look at the key factors, the key groupings on how culture changed. We've then got to be able to explain how different areas of German culture changed, so develop it a bit more. How did the years 24 to 29 cause this change in culture and change in outlook on life, which we've already kind of covered when we looked at the role of women. And also evaluate the response to these changes. Look at how the traditional conservative German population dealt with this. Now to start the lesson, I want you to answer the following question. Now remember, question 3b is about looking at how two interpretations are different. Now both of these interpretations are saying something different about culture in Germany. You need to be able to finish these sentences by looking at the two interpretations. So, these two interpretations discuss how culture changed in Germany. What's the difference? So interpretation 1. Germany in the years 24 to 29 became the cultural capital of the world, overtaking Paris. Germany was the place in which people could express themselves, indulge in arts and theatre, and be free to express their opinions. And interpretation 2. Germany became an area which stood out in many ways, especially regards to cinema. The cinema became an area where the filmmakers took risks and used technology to develop outstanding films such as Metropolis. There's lots of similarities in there, but I want you to tell me in this what the main difference is. So finish the 4 sentences. So underneath the title and today's date, interpretation 1 is saying that culture, and finish the sentence. A quote to support this is, pick a quote from the interpretation, whereas interpretation 2 says that culture is, and a quote to support this is. 5 minutes, pause the video here and complete this exam question. These are easy 4 marks because you don't need any knowledge on these questions. Right, so the Golden Age, culture. What are we actually looking at in this time period? This is what we're looking at. An era of cabaret, singing, dancing, sexual expression in Germany. New styles of architecture, buildings. No censorship, meaning that things aren't hidden from the population. Cinema and literature is a lot more expressive and isn't afraid to say negative things about the past. Berlin becomes a cultural capital, meaning that people from all around Europe come to Berlin to see the culture. You've got things such as transvestite dances, which is totally unheard of in Germany before 1924. And another thing is that homosexuality is not taboo. It's not a subject that people avoid anymore. It's a subject where people can be a lot more expressive and open about their sexuality. This is the cultural golden age. So after the turmoil, so after those difficult periods of 18 to 23, liberal constitutional democracy survived in Germany. That's the Weimar. And it survived up until 1929, until the Wall Street crash, which we'll look at in future lessons. Now the Weimar Republic was one of the most fertile grounds for modern arts and science. Berlin became a thriving centre of many new art movements, such as Dadaism and Bauhaus. So what we're going to look at today is this type of exam question, and by the end of this lesson you will be able to write a paragraph on culture. So remember, explain question is 12 marks, and you'd have to write about 3 things. So in this case you'd write about culture, women, you could also write about standards of living, or Stresemann. Now what I want you to do is task 1, a golden age. We've discussed this. A golden age is a period where people feel happier, their morale is a lot more positive, and people support one another, but at the same time it's a golden age where people are free, liberal, able to do what they want to do. So I'd like you to write these 6 titles down in your books and leave 5 lines in between, because we're going to build up some evidence of these 6 types of culture, and then we are going to develop further why it was such a golden period for the Weimar. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the information for this. And I want you to aim to write 3 facts about each one, specific facts, with keywords that you would be able to use in the 12 marker. So on your paper and your books, we'll go through each one. I'm going to go through 2 of them, and then I'm going to put the next slide up. That's where you pause the video and then complete it, and then the rest for the final 3. So art. Art is the first one we will look at, and art's quite a controversial change. Now this here, you've got a painting which was produced during the Golden Period, and what this does is it basically criticises Germany. It focuses on the fact that Germany is possibly run by rich individuals. In the back here is a soldier from World War I that quite obviously has been forgotten about. Okay, and a lot of people say that this brick wall symbolises the crumbling of Germany in this period. But basically, in regards to Germany, it was at the forefront of new styles and movements in art and design. Most artists tried to show everyday life. They believed that art should be a comment on society at the time, and it became known as Neue Sachlichkeit, meaning new objectivity. Okay, so new objectivity means showing society at the time. So art represents what was going on in Germany at the time. Some artists wanted to show the ugly side of human nature, which is what the artist of this picture in the top corner here, Otto Dix, did quite famously during this period. Now there were also famous artists such as George Grosz, who wanted to show how depressing life was following the war. So it was about identifying society, but also looking back on society and being objective about what they were seeing. Grosz was famous for painting doll-like figures who have no control over their lives in depressing cities. So these artists wanted to be objective about what was going on and what they had been through. So the thing is, if we remember the years 1918 to 1923, it was a very depressing time for Germany. So artists represent that in this objective, approached, free style of art. And going back to what we said at the very beginning, they could get away with this because there was no censorship, which meant everything they did could be viewed by the public and nothing would be hidden. So that's the first one, art. If you want to pause the video here so you can see the information for a bit longer, pause it now, and I'll go on to the next factor. Cinema. Now obviously cinema is something that was a pretty new concept in the 1920s, but Germany became a world leader in cinema and produced directors that produced some of the most far-reaching, out-there films that the Europe, maybe even the world, had seen in this period. So you had directors such as Fritz Lang and Ernst Lubitsch making more films as a single country than the rest of Europe combined. So Germany in this period made more films during the years 24 to 29 than the whole of Europe combined. Why is this so important? It shows Germany to be a world leader. Germany are building their strength again. If they're building a good industry in cinema, they are going to get more money. But more importantly, the messages of their films, the standout features of their films, and one of them, Fritz Lang's film Metropolis, was a technical masterpiece. At this stage in cinema history, there were very few films that had attempted the sci-fi genre, and that's what Metropolis was. And it really went out there in regards to the different technological aspects of it. And there was also another hit film called The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and it was a horror film that had a message of anti-war and anti-military. So again, that was another sort of maybe dig at society to say they didn't want war, they didn't agree with war, and didn't agree with the military. But the cinema was a key part of Weimar culture. It trialled new things, it tested new things, and it was successful, and it showed Europe where they could be in regards to cultural strength. Right, architecture. I'll go through this one, then I'll leave the last 3 on. So, the establishment of the Bauhaus School of Design by Walter Gropius. He believed in using basic shapes and colours, and it was very different to the old elaborate style. The Bauhaus movement is simplistic, rectangular, square shapes. Now this was replaced by the Nazis later on, because the Nazis believed in having powerful architecture. But at this stage, architecture went through a very simplistic code. Bauhaus was the leading centre of art and design, but as I said, it was closed by the Nazis in 1933 because of its radical approaches to teaching and research. The Bauhaus movement was too simplistic for the Nazis. It didn't show power. But by having a simple basic shape, it means that they were going to be a lot more effective. The Bauhaus movement was one of the key architectural designs during this period of the golden years. Okay. Architecture, there isn't a huge amount you can write about, but if you want to pause it here, write down 2 or 3 facts, and then I'm going to put the last 3 slides on. Give yourself 2 or 3 minutes reading through it and adding 3 facts for each one. So the 4th one is literature. Now the thing to point out here is that this freedom also led to a lot of negativity about the Weimar, which it doesn't help the Weimar Republic, the fact that literature was being critical of it, especially as the Weimar was giving it the freedom that they wanted. The 5th one is cabaret and dance. And the last one is theatre. And again, theatre really does focus on the downside of Germany prior to the golden years, including plays which included piles of money, war helmets, criticising Germany while sitting on a toilet, which was an insult to the government. Culture was thriving, but culture also allowed people to criticise what they had in front of them. Now that you've built up a picture of what culture was like at this stage, task 2 is focusing on resistance of change, and I want you to look back on the information and write a bullet point, 5 bullet points, on why traditional Germans would be unhappy with these cultural changes. So many Germans saw the new trends in culture as a threat to civilization. Okay? There were a lot of artists that were associated with the Communist Party, which was a fashionable in intellectual circles all over Europe, but it was that fear that the communists might seriously take over at this stage. And they blamed the emergence of these movements in the moral laxity of the new republic. So a lot of traditional Germans said the government were lazy, and it was because of their moral laziness that this cultural revolution was able to happen. So just think, 5 reasons why old traditional Germans would be unhappy with the changes that we've been through in this lesson. So if you pause the video here and try and think of 5 reasons ready to give feedback on. Right, now that you've got the information, I want you to give this a go. I want you to write this question down, explain why 24 to 29 was a golden age in Weimar Republic, and I want you to write in 8 minutes the paragraph on culture. So you are giving 3 pieces of evidence on culture and explaining why that created a golden age. So you would say why it was positive. You wouldn't say anything negative here. That would be in a how far question. Spend 8 minutes, ignore that 5-minute paragraph bit, it's 8 minutes on this. In the exam you'd have about 6, 7. But give yourself 8 minutes, going back the information you've got in this lesson, and finish this 12 marker on culture. Don't worry about the other paragraphs. Pause the video, write this, so that your teacher can have a look through this in a bit more detail. Right, the homework, if you are not here, this is going to be vital to next lesson. Revise the following events: Kaputsch, Spartacist, political assassinations, occupation of the Ruhr, and hyperinflation.